Welcome to iPad Pros, the show all about using your iPad to be productive and get work done. I'm Tim Chen, host of the show.
This episode is sponsored by Agenda 14. Learn more at agenda.com.
In terms of education, in an education setting, having the slide over and the split view and then the trackpad, most of the kids are getting the same experience that they would get from, carrying a MacBook or a Chromebook, right? Where you're struggling with 100 tabs open. Here you're kind of working on simple tasks, one task at a time, or in some cases, if you need two tasks up, you could do that slide over and split view.
Welcome back to another episode of iPad Pros. In this episode, we're joined by Marko, who has been a high school social studies teacher since 2001. His class is now one-to-one on iPad. And in this episode, we discuss how school technology has changed since 2001, including a lot of really cool details like a new ability Apple released for schools to remote screen monitor iPads. He started experimenting with iPads in the school since the iPad 2 was released, and there are a lot of cool tidbits in this episode I think you'll enjoy hearing about. As a reminder, this episode is sponsored by Agenda 14, which was released last month. It is available now as a free download in the App Store. I'll have a bit more to share on Agenda later on in this episode. Download Agenda now to get started with one of my favorite apps that I continue to use year after year. With that, here's my interview with Marko. Enjoy. Welcome to the podcast, Marko.
Thanks, Tim, for having me on.
Absolutely. So we're going to dive into a lot of stuff with what you do as a teacher, but can you first kind of introduce yourself and your current iPad setup?
Yeah, so my name is Marko Markolovic. I'm actually a high school social studies teacher in a school outside of New York City, about 45 minutes from the city. We're in the suburbs. The school's kind of small. The high school's about 400 to 500 kids, depending on the year.
Okay.
My current setup is an iPad Pro, 1 terabyte, 16 gigabytes of RAM. I broke that rule of, buying an iPad or buying any device in the hopes that software would be there at some point. But yeah, that's basically what I'm currently using in terms of my iPad.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's the same model I have. And yeah, I did the same thing because have all the headroom you can possibly ask for with all that RAM and storage. So you don't need to upgrade later. And hopefully people will do stuff with it. And hopefully Apple will be one of those people with awesome apps and OS features that take advantage of RAM like that. We were talking pre-show how I was surprised when I left LumaFusion the other day that my video export didn't suddenly stop and give me an error message. Instead, when I came back a couple minutes later, it was still running. And then I checked the release notes in the App Store, and it looks like they're one of the few developers that are taking advantage of that new RAM entitlement you can ask Apple for. And if you have a fancy iPad Pro, it'll keep running in the background and take advantage of that RAM. So we're starting to see a couple apps start to take advantage of it, which is cool.
Yeah, that's really great. And hopefully, with the summer and iOS 16 and all the future software updates, that we get more and more, especially with external monitor support, and then like some of the multitasking would be great too, to get more windows up on an iPad.
Yeah, that's the next hurdle. We've got the keyboard and mouse and trackpads, so let's graduate to the external monitor and do that in a cool way. So hopefully that happens very soon here. So you teach high school social studies. What got you into teaching, and how many years have you been teaching?
So it was actually, I actually graduated from college and kind of needed to figure out something to do. I was actually going to go on for a PhD in history, and, life circumstances kind of just make you take different detours. So I ended up teaching at a local Catholic high school in the city and realized that A, I was good at it, B, I loved doing it, and always remembered all those great teachers that I had. And so this was an opportunity for me to kind of give back. I originally thought about going back to that school, my high school, and kind of where I had graduated from, and to actually teach there. But, openings never materialized. So I ended up looking for different jobs and ended up further in the suburbs. And right now, this is my 20th year teaching. Actually, my first day in class with students was 9/11, actually.
Wow.
Yeah. So we talk about like there are pivot points in the 20 years that I've been doing this. You look at that first day, and we had fighter jets fly over. We weren't anywhere near ground zero, but the uncertainty of everything that's happening, you're kind of sitting there not knowing what's going on. The kids don't know where their parents are.
And their parents work in the city, a lot of them.
Yeah, so you had that mad scramble to the payphones because you didn't even have, cell service went down and whatever. So, that was the first pivot point. And the second was the 2008, 2009 financial crisis that kind of restricted budgets and caused some movement around that way. And of course, the pandemic. But yeah, it's been an interesting 20 years.
Yeah, I'd say so. From a technology standpoint, so 2001, were you guys using iMacs and stuff, or was technology much of a part of teaching, and how has that kind of evolved over the years?
Well, so you would have like the typical computer lab that would have like your PCs in there. You might have one room that had a couple of iMacs, but basically it was non-existent, especially in the private school that I taught in, because the budget didn't allow for a lot of that stuff. Now circumstances have changed for that particular location where I am now. We're one-to-one, but yeah, I mean, those first few years was me buying, and I forget the MacBook that I had, but it was the big guy, the 17-inch.
Oh yeah, that was my first Mac I ever owned, the 17-inch. It was from 2007 though.
Yeah, and so I when that eventually came out and it had like the cram speaker, the cram keyboard, and then had the speaker grills on the side.
It was hilarious. You had the same size keyboard on all models, including the 17-inch. I love that machine so much, though. It was like a portable desktop.
Yeah, it totally was. So I had that eventually, but what I started with was like an 11-inch Dell computer, laptop that I could plug into a projector. And, those were the days of nothing was compatible in terms of Microsoft compatibility. Right. There's no Google in 2001, or at least that I remember.
Did you ever have to deal with overhead projectors and printing out these like transparent sheets you write on and stuff, or is that more of a math room?
No, that was, so it's funny. We had, so you either had a laptop cart where you put your laptop and then you put the projector, or you had the overhead where, you would take those markers and kind of, you would, I'd be covered in chalk and markers because, if you wanted to do anything interactive at that point, it was sort of like you had to have these like wet dry erase markers that you can manipulate the transparent film, and kind of, even if you wanted to print something to them, was sort of an exercise in torture, because you couldn't get any of that stuff on there. And so, and then, I tell the story sometimes of a friend of mine actually tried to change one of those bulbs while it was still hot.
Oh gosh.
So yeah, because most of the tech back then we bought ourselves. So, you try to find a school that was closing down, or another private school that, was getting rid of its resources or whatever. And so you'd scoop one up, change the bulb, and, midday I had to take them to the emergency room. So, but yeah, that's when we learned not to touch those bulbs. So yeah, it wasn't very interactive in 2001 in terms of the tech. And certainly as you go forward from 2001, I mean, the whole world changed, right? I mean, you have one-to-one devices. We bought, when I eventually came to the job that I have now, we bought netbook carts. We had those little cheapy
Did you ever have a Palm Pilot one-to-one program? I remember I had that briefly for a couple years. I think it was in high school.
No, I never had a Palm Pilot. It was funny because a lot of the stuff that I was using wasn't, I don't remember any of it being actually interactive, like working very well. So, it was kind of like, when I got to 2007, I bought that MacBook, and that was kind of the entry point of where things were getting better in terms of like the tech. So you got
for the one-to-one stuff, when did you start experiencing that? Was it with the netbook cart you mentioned? Is that right?
Yeah. So we started one-to-one with netbooks because obviously they were cheap. They didn't last very long. So, and they weren't very powerful. So they were kind of, the parent of, the Chromebooks that eventually everybody, especially in the US, seems to be buying everywhere. So those netbooks were underpowered. They were just a place to get onto the network, go to Google, use Google Docs.
As Steve Jobs mentioned during the iPad introduction, netbooks are not good for anything.
Yeah, he wasn't wrong. He really wasn't wrong. I mean, those of us who were living those days, those, and eventually you could change the OS to like using Chromium or something and convert it to a Chromebook, but they were so underpowered.
And you would use that basically just for word processing and basic web browsing?
Yeah, that's it. I mean, it couldn't handle very much more. So like, you were maxing out whatever capabilities there were just from doing that. So you didn't really do much of video production or recording. If you wanted to do any of that stuff, you went to the Mac lab where, you would have a few iMacs, a couple of Mac Minis, and then you would go to the computer lab if you wanted to do anything that was more intensive with, PCs and stuff like that. But yeah, I mean, as far as one-to-one, we just had those mobile carts. You can sign them out, bring a bunch of them to your classroom, and then, you would fight other teachers to get access to them.
So, how did the one-to-one program evolve over the years? I know you're now at a one-to-one iPad. Was there, more powerful laptops in between you getting to iPads, or what was that process like?
So basically, I want to say that I think the iPad 2 came out. I know the iPad, I bought the original iPad.
Yep. So 2011, iPad 2 was released.
Yeah. So I think that's when we started exploring, because everybody else was doing the same thing, and we were trying to get ahead of the curve a bit. And so we had 40 iPad 2s that basically became, we had done our pilot. Teachers were kind of like, what am I going to do with this thing? Because there wasn't a whole lot you could do with those iPads, right? I mean,
yeah, those early days, yeah.
Yeah, it was basically sit on your couch and read a book. Maybe you watch family videos. I don't know who.
Yeah, I mean, there was pages and numbers and all that.
Yeah, there was no collaboration though, and there was nothing, right? I mean, so it was very much intended to be that, I guess, the consumption device. You sit on your couch.
For sure.
I think that's the way Steve Jobs, described it, right?
Yeah, it's your relaxing device where you're on a couch.
Yeah, and enjoying whatever the New York Times or whatever on there. And so we bought 40 iPad 2s to kind of see what teachers would do with them, and we couldn't do very much, right? So I asked my director of technology at the time, I said, if you're going to put these back in a closet, could I actually use them instead of putting them back in the closet? And so we started to explore different ways. And I just, the challenges back then of there was no management software. And at least I don't know that there was JAMF.
Yeah. So you had to set each one up individually. And
then you would share, like I'd have to take a sheet of paper and write codes for the apps, right? So like I'd be like, hey, Johnny.
Yeah, like the ethics behind buying apps, like you're supposed to, I think in school settings, have licenses for each iPad versus using a single account and just downloading them all for free or something.
Yeah, because you were actually giving them away. So like you couldn't. I think in New York State, I'm not 100% sure of the law, but I want to say that we couldn't even give them away for free. So I don't know where we were back then in terms of what was allowed and what wasn't. But I mean, I was handing out kids, telling them, hey, sign in with your personal account, your Apple ID, and here are the apps. And so, but that was the world, I think, in 2011.
Right.
With iPads. So I basically became the one-to-one for my district. I was, using the 40 iPads. And, I was thinking before we caught up, I was thinking of different apps and things that the workflows back then and how dependent everything was on Goodreader. Because you could airdrop files, you can create a shared folder, you could do all of that stuff in 2011. Just to have simple workarounds in terms of how do you share material. And then, of course, iTunes U was great because, that was the first example of what Google Classroom would become, right?
Yeah.
So you could share files, folders, you could do all that stuff. It wasn't easy, but, that's how I learned a lot about iPad and the management of the side of stuff, because you had to be creative in terms of sharing files and doing basic tasks.
Yeah, for sure. So iPad 2, what iPad are the students using today, and kind of what do you remember when you guys did do the updates? Like, was it every 3 or 4 years you got a new version of the iPad in the classroom?
So we went from iPad 2s till they basically started screaming.
Yeah.
And then, because in most public school settings, you don't get to replace, even though we talk about 5-year cycles, it doesn't quite work that way. So buying the advantage of the iPad is that it lasts, right? I mean, it's great. So we went with iPad 2. I think the next replacement was the iPad Air 1.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And the iPad Air 2, I think. That was the next. I don't remember what year that was.
Air 2 was right before the Pros were released, so I think that was 2015.
2015, okay. So we went there, and again, we're talking about janky styluses too, right? Those styluses that have the bulb that you press down.
Finger. You're just cutting off someone's finger and using it.
Yeah, that's basically it. And then I reached out to Donut and said, could we buy? They had those styluses with a disc on the end of them.
I love those. They were still using the same tech of we're pretending to be a finger, but it felt better and
it felt better, and it didn't scratch the screen because initially it was like, oh no, with this scratch.
Yeah, I remember mine had a little red dot in the middle of this plastic disc at the end, and I did like that quite a bit.
Yeah, and it worked, right? I mean, it wasn't. Yeah. It's nowhere near Apple, the Apple Pencil 1 and Apple Pencil 2, but it did its job. I mean, there was the janky leather cases that had the plastic keys.
Oh, yeah. Stylus early days, the students were marking up PDFs and books and stuff, or what was the use case for styluses in the early days?
So in the early days, it was so Goodreader had, I want to say it was Goodreader and PDF Expert. I want to say one of them, because again, it was like, you forget where we were at that point, but it was, markup PDFs. It was like, if kids needed to draw something or fill out a document or do any of those simple tasks, you basically did it there. You use those style. The problem was that those styluses were never precise, so you would get big thick lines when you try to zoom, and it wasn't great.
And
today,
I'm curious. Logitech crayons, Apple pencils. What are you guys using?
Yeah, so today, from the iPad Air 1 and 2, we went to the iPad 5th generation that had I don't think it had stylus support. And then, of course, Apple being Apple, the 6th generation, it, supports. Yeah. It's like, come on, guys, really? So we now use 6th, 7th, and 8th generation iPads with the kids really don't like the Logitech crayons, which is weird because like I have to remind kids that because they'll be like, hey, can I just have an Apple Pencil? Like, it's an Apple Pencil, right?
They want to be more professional with the Apple one.
Well, but I also think the Logitech design of putting the lightning. Yeah, and putting the lightning port at the back of the device, right? So like you have to kind of like plug in, you always have to carry the lightning, cable, plug in the back of the Logitech Crayon, let it charge. Whereas with the Apple Pencil, you're just plugging it in, which is what we do now. And I'm like, guys, just be careful because now it looks like a manatee or no.
Have you ever had one snap off?
No.
Okay, good.
I'm
curious about that in a classroom setting. The Crayon, the battery life, I'd imagine it's much better though, right? It's bigger.
Yeah, it's bigger. I mean, I don't know that there is very much difference.
And you can switch them off, but students might not be good about switching them off, I'm guessing.
Yeah, I mean, that's the problem. And I think they go to sleep after a while, so they're supposed to be conserving their battery in terms of the Crayon. But
yeah,
the pencil, the pencil, if it was a little more matte, like the 2nd generation pencil, I think would be better because it would help kids with like their tripod grips and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But
and as far as what you guys use the pencils and crayons for now, is it similar tasks, or because it's more advanced, are you able to do more with them and use different kind of applications?
No, it's definitely more. I mean, the kids can, I'm just thinking of a project that I'm recently doing with some of my students where, we share a Keynote slide and the kids are drawing and mapping out like designs for a project right in Keynote, right from the pencil itself.
Yeah.
Right. With the pencil as opposed to, grabbing dry erase markers and doing some of that stuff. But yeah, I mean, the kids can draw, which is great because now everything they're doing is much more precise. So it looks like what they're doing on paper as opposed to, what it looked like 5 or 6 years ago with the janky styluses. But yeah, I mean, with the first, because we're using first gen Apple Pencils, the pressure sensitivity, some of that stuff works really well. Like some of the kids will use it for art, stuff like that.
Are the kids able to take home iPads at this point, or is it staying at the school?
No, they take them home. We use the Logitech Combo Touch cases, and so they take them home. They carry them around.
And that has the trackpad, I believe, right?
Yeah, it has the trackpad, which again is like, you think about iPad's evolution, right? And that's kind of, in terms of education, in an education setting, having the slide over and the split view and then the trackpad, most of the kids are getting the same experience that they would get from, carrying a MacBook or a Chromebook, right? Where you're struggling with 100 tabs open. Here you're kind of working on simple tasks, one task at a time, or in some cases, if you need 2 tasks up, you could do that slide over and split view.
Yeah, it's more focused for the work they're doing, right? There are less distractions, hopefully.
Yeah, and now with JAMF and the management software, we can limit some of the things they can get access to,
right?
Which makes it an Apple School Manager. I mean, setting up school accounts are so easy now compared to where they were 5 or 6 years ago. So you have so much more. Apple is finally recognizing that, there is a market there to help support, districts that want to go all iPad. And it's kind of funny because it's kind of late to where, like, you look at Google and you look at Google, they were kind of ahead of where Apple was in terms of supporting Chromebooks.
Yeah, I remember back in the day, Apple Remote Desktop, like Mac management was something they had for a while, and I remember doing that in college, managing like a Mac lab, and that was pretty good. And that was kind of it was always fun taking over another computer and like sending them a message or something.
Yeah, and but it's also like for us, because next year will be the entire high school will have iPads, and I want to say that 3/4 of the elementary school will have iPads. And so, when you're rolling out that number of devices, this is where Google had the advantage of all you had to do was turn on the device, and the profile would be there, and all of that information would be there. All the kid had to do was sign in with their account. So it's kind of one of those things where, JAMF and Apple School Manager are catching up.
Yeah, because you said you started with iTunes U, so it went from that to where you are today. It took a while to get here.
Oh, it definitely did. And with iTunes U, it was great because you could overcome the issue of sharing a file, right? How do you share a file on an iPad 2? I don't even remember what that looked like, but AirDrop wasn't
you
even.
had to hook up the iTunes or something, right?
Yeah, so it wasn't. Or back to my Mac or back to whatever it was at the time.
Yeah.
So because I had to buy a MacBook Air to kind of back up whatever files I was doing on the iPad. So, and I have both devices. But yeah, when you think about iTunes U, had a great system. You could share a video, you could share documents, you could share just about anything, URLs, and get kids to whatever sites you were looking to get them to. You could grade, eventually grading entered into that portion where I think most of that stuff now is just in Apple Schoolwork.
Yeah.
In terms of what they've copied.
And was it just a natural evolution from iTunes U to the JAMF and stuff, or was there a discussion at your school of should we go with Google Classroom even if you're using iPads somehow? I don't know if these were compatible in any way.
No, they are. I mean, it's basically a Google Classroom is just a window to like get access to information, right? Like, so we were just looking for, could we post materials where kids could get access to them, and then we could provide feedback. And so we weren't so much which device; it was more like how do we get everything online, and how do we get folks to post their materials ahead of time and come out of their classrooms in terms of what they were doing and be more, just have more of a presence online in terms of that stuff. So Google Classroom was just a natural place to go because we had bought actually Chromebooks. And the plan was from 6th to 12th grade that we would just use Chromebooks.
Yeah.
And, the kids returned the devices. Some of the devices broke, so that wasn't great. But what was left behind from all of that experience was, hey, we could post our materials online. We could share whatever we needed to share for our students. And, now that's just carried over with the iPad because there's a Google Classroom app. The Google software docs, slides, and Excel are like from a different planet.
Yeah.
It's almost like the same company didn't produce the same apps.
So does your school use both Google Classroom alongside the JAMF stuff? Is it a combination of both of those?
Yeah. So we don't really have it's not a requirement that we put. Like some school districts will require that you use Google Classroom. You have to use Google Classroom. We don't have that policy yet. I'm sure at some point that'll come. But yeah, the JAMF side of things is just to manage what apps are we distributing.
This episode is sponsored by Agenda, which rolled out version 14 last month. In this quick break, I want to share more about their awesome new smart menu bar for iPad in Agenda 14. If you missed the last episode, make sure to check out the break in that episode for more on this new smart menu bar. In this break, I'm going to share more about the / smart menu bar, which is a general purpose hotkey menu bar. To get started, just type / while in any note. Immediately after, hit the down arrow on your keyboard, and you'll now be navigating this very feature-rich menu. If you start typing after the /, you can filter this very huge list of actions into what you are actually looking for. Here is what is available in this / smart menu bar. And I may be missing some because it is that feature-rich and there is just so much here. You can insert a tag, person, reminder, star, date, time, expression, horizontal rule, a table, a link, a summary, attachment, drawing, template. You can change paragraph styles such as body, heading 1, 2, 3, or 4, create a list, check or uncheck or reset a list, toggle character styles like bold, italic, underline, fixed width, strike through, superscript, or subscript. You can mark that entire note as on the agenda, done, undone, pin it, create a footnote, assign a date to the note. You can link the note to an event, and finally, you can split the note, duplicate it, or move it. This incredibly rich set of features is all available just by typing / in a note, and you can either arrow down through this list or start typing the filter to what you want to do. Once you learn this feature set is available to you at all times here in this little / menu, it gets really powerful, and actions that used to take some time tapping or moving your trackpad to are done in seconds with a couple clicks of your keyboard. And this is a feature that's available to everybody, even those that don't upgrade to the premium version of Agenda, so give it a try today. Some of these options do have their own unique keyboard shortcuts, but if you don't have the time to learn a bunch of different shortcuts, you can just learn to / and filter to get access to all of this with just one keyboard shortcut, the /. Get started today for free by downloading Agenda in the App Store. And if you like what you're using and want even more from the app, give the premium version a try. You get a ton of power user features that are yours to keep even if you never pay for premium more than just that once. My thanks again to Agenda for sponsoring this episode of iPad Pros. Learn more at www.agenda.com. That's www.agenda.com. Download Agenda today for free in the App Store. You use Apple Classroom on top of that for the student interaction side of things.
Yeah, and AirDrop, that's again, when you think about the evolution of iPad in terms of its use in the classroom, Apple Classroom, Apple Schoolwork, Apple's like finally getting to the place where it's like, okay, people are actually using these devices in the classroom. How can we watch? How can you supervise?
Yeah.
The great, and Classroom does a great job because you can see what the kids are doing on their devices.
Is it like a live screen of all the kids' devices at once?
Yeah. It's 100. As long as everybody's on the same network and you have Bluetooth turned on and you've got all that stuff, it live screen. And of course, Apple with its privacy, you can't, you get a little symbol at the top so you know that you're being
you're being watched,
reviewed and watched.
Any kids try to turn off Wi-Fi to be private.
Well, I mean, I haven't seen, and it's funny, I teach high school, I teach 11th and 12th grade, so we're talking about 17, 18-year-olds, so they're kind of, they don't go over those boundaries, so they're kind of good about, I'll just use it for school, for school purposes.
And I know with the school side of things, you can create user accounts, and like a kid can like grab a random iPad and be into their account. Is that something you guys utilize since it's one-to-one, and that's probably something you don't really need as much?
Yeah, so each kid gets, and I forget when Apple did it, but each school account gets 250 gigs of RAM. Of storage. Sorry, they get 250 gigs of storage. We don't use the multiple accounts settings on the iPad. We just give one iPad to every kid. The elementary school is starting to give Apple IDs to some of the kids so that they can get more of the features of classroom and schoolwork. But we haven't really used the multiple accounts to a single device.
Okay. Yeah, and you were mentioning the iPad 5 didn't have Apple Pencil support, and I just wanted to circle back a bit how aggressively Apple did update and improve that baseline iPad. 1 year was Apple Pencil, the next year was Smart Keyboard support, and it's like they're just bringing all these pro-level features that we thought were pro-level down to that base level, which was so important for things like what you're doing with being able to use that trackpad and keyboard through that smart computer.
Well, and it's funny because like I tell teachers who get their device, because I'll help train the trainers and help teachers when they start getting their devices. It's sort of like if you thought of an iPad from that Steve Jobs introduction of the iPad to I don't know how we distinguish this of like the Tim Cook era of the iPad, right?
The Pro era, I would say.
The Pro era, right? So it's not the same device, right? You think about
because input method is such a huge factor as to framing a device and what it can and cannot do, and it's just grown so rapidly there.
Yeah, and on the developer side, it's sort of like recognizing that there are teachers, there are people out there who want to do some of this stuff on their device. So can we support some of those things? So like, you think about Notability, you think about Good Notes, Explain Everything. You've got companies that recognize that, hey, folks are going to start using this stuff for something other than reading books or listening to podcasts.
What is Explain Everything? I haven't heard of that one.
So Explain Everything is basically a whiteboard app. So you can do so if you had to do sort of like the Khan Academy videos of, how do you explain something or break it down, you can basically, you get a canvas, and with an Apple Pencil now, you can record your voice, you can input PDF, you can input websites, you can do a simple whiteboard video recording, and basically have the full functionality of screen recording right on the iPad. You can bring yourself into the screen. They did a great job when the pandemic started of giving out free accounts to educators to help support teachers. It was phenomenal because you can also share a link and collaborate. So you could have almost like the whiteboard in your classroom pop up on a student device where they could just watch what you're doing if you needed to demo something for kids live.
And you could use this as an alternative to Zoom, or is this something you use within Zoom using screen share?
You'd probably use it within within Zoom with screen share, because or you could actually, from the Explain Everything, you can actually email, post to Google Classroom a link, and the kids could join you. Okay. And they could see it right on the screen. Because that's one of the things when you look at Zoom on an iPad, it's interesting because Apple awarded them whatever design award, and it's so limited in terms of what you can accomplish versus iPad versus desktop that I wish Zoom had done more to make their iPad app to kind of look like the Mac, the Mac side of things or PC side of things with breakout rooms and things like that. I think now it's been more updated to sort of look like that. But yeah, I mean,
and Zoom's one of the few apps that has some weird entitlement that lets you use the camera in split screen, which I wish was a more widespread entitlement. Apple.
Because every time, and it was frustrating because you'd be like, okay, guys, I'm going to share the screen with you. You put something into, and I don't know if split view still doesn't do it, but like you would lose, like kids would lose you on the screen. So
yeah, I think they added where you can be in split screen and the camera still works. So that's something I know works now.
Yeah. So, I mean, having that ability would have been great at the beginning, right? So you would have to, in my case, I had a 12.9 and 11-inch iPad because, listening to different podcasts about the multi-iPad lifestyle.
Oh, yeah.
And So I would start one meeting on one device and then have the second device join as a visitor, and it wasn't great, right?
No.
Because the functionality wasn't there, and even though there's pro level iPads, you kind of like
The software was limiting to you.
yeah, the software is limited, and I don't know if and Apple has kind of recognized that now because with Keynote Live and with the and Apple Classroom updates, you can now see iPads remotely. So if I was in a
Remotely in the same room, or even remotely, like
remotely, so remotely at home.
Wow.
And I didn't know this until recently when I had we had a snow day that we had converted to a remote day.
Yeah.
And I turned on
I must say, that must be the worst as a kid. You're happy you have a snow day, and then remote day. We know how to teach you remotely now.
Yeah, and especially I think it's even worse for little guys, right?
Oh,
high school kids kind of tune you out and do whatever. But yeah, so I turned on my school managed iPad and I opened Classroom, and there it was, all 22 kids.
That's amazing.
Signed into their devices, which again, it's like Apple. Why couldn't you do this like in 2020?
Yeah,
but that's okay. I mean, eventually showed up. But yeah, I mean, even like the schoolwork updates, like they just, the ability to collaborate. And some of it is weird because you can collaborate in Keynote, but you can't collaborate in Pages.
Yeah. How is Keynote Live? What is that all about?
So Keynote Live is basically the best way to describe it is kind of adding your video to a presentation, right? And so your camera, so you can add both cameras. So, which is kind of weird.
Front and back, it's simultaneously.
Simultaneously. So
is there a use case of that you found?
Well, so the best way to do that is to have kids kind of do a gallery walk where they're looking at different material within, the classroom, and sort of ask them to give, record, what do you see? What do you take away from this particular station as you go through the station and learn about the content that you're learning, and get that live reaction where kids could then turn on the screen record and record themselves with both cameras, one facing the poster or the section of the wall wherever you have things hung up, and then getting the live feedback in terms of the video. It's been great.
So kids would capture through screen recording this Keynote Live. You could also, if you're doing live presentations, have those cameras enabled as well, or like?
Yeah. So basically what you can do is, if you think about it, it's like adding, if you're doing a talking head video where you need to walk somebody through a presentation.
Yeah.
You could put yourself in a corner like that. So kids could record, traditional presentations where kids would stand in front of the room. You could say, hey guys and gals, why don't you go off, put your camera, and I would show kids how to set it up. And, you could do 3 to 4 minute presentation videos.
Yeah.
And get that in.
The old way would be using the camera app, capturing it, and then importing a video in the Keynote. And that's all kind of as a standalone file you'd give out. But Keynote Live, instead of importing a video, you frame out how big you want that video in that slide. And it's just turning on your camera where you can just present in that way.
Yeah, and it's a great way, even if you were doing like, if you think of those Elmos, those things that were go on a desk to kind of show you what I'm doing under the camera. You could put your iPad on a stand and record right under your screen. If you didn't want to use the camera app or something, you can do. There are a bunch of different use cases. But again, that's kind of like, and then I guess the other update to Keynote was the present in view in the window, as opposed to, the play, what was that option? Because there's another option that was great that Apple did later, which is like the play in window as opposed to play the slideshow, and it would take up your entire screen.
Okay.
So you could have, if you were using a Mac, and because if you use the Mac and use Keynote together, take up your whole screen, you couldn't see yourself. So with live video, you could put yourself on the screen, you could share the screen, share the presentation if that's something you wanted to do, or if you just wanted to record on your Mac, right? Because you you would need QuickTime or, ScreenFlow or some other app to kind of bring your camera in. Now you could just use Keynote, throw in QuickTime, and you've got yourself, basically a low budget, screen recording option.
Yeah.
If that was something that you wanted to do.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I mean, Keynote is a game changer in terms of all their updates because you can export video. So if you wanted to do Magic Move and do some of that stuff, you could export it as a video itself. You could add audio to each slide.
Apple Pencil is used in some interesting ways too.
Yeah, so you can draw shapes. You can edit fully any image. You can basically take control of your presentation right from your pencil. The only thing that's not great is when you're in the play mode of on your iPad, you get this overlay that gives you some pencil tools that look like they're from an old previous generation of Apple Note or something.
Yeah.
It doesn't save any of it, which is come on, Apple, really? But again, if you're doing that screen record on your iPad and you need a quick video, it's a great way to capture that. So, and then the drawing of the shapes and going through the Apple Pencil in terms of manipulating the shapes that you put up there, handling the animations of things on the slide, Keynote fully takes advantage of the Apple Pencil, which is not true of Pages, for instance. You can't collaborate for some reason with Apple Pencil. At least I can't figure it out.
Yeah.
I don't know if somebody has a solution, but...
And how have the students taken to using the iPad? Was it something they found natural, and are you mostly using the external keyboard, or are they touch typing as well on the screen, or how have you seen that play out?
So it's actually interesting because when you look at the $149 Chromebooks we were using, the screens and the keyboards were breaking. So when the kids started to see my students carrying around iPads, using iPads, they wanted an iPad. So we gave them iPads, right? When the pandemic and everything else happened. And what we found is basically the kids take to it. It's actually pretty simple, right? Because they probably already have an iPhone, so they're used to the OS. The only thing, the gesture support, they don't quite pick up on. So there's some time there to be like, hey, this is how you get two apps going. Yeah. Here's the dock. Here's how you put things in the dock.
Has the new multitasking menu thing up top, has that been easier to teach how to do multitasking, or is it more?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of wonder if that's why Apple put it there, if that was for the younger guys, the high school students and the elementary school students who would need to know that that's where it is. Because if you're coming into the iPad having not used previous versions, you don't know that the gesture support even exists. Yeah. So having that menu up there is great because you could just hit it, it'll move the screen, and some of the kids forget that it's there. But so you go from that $149 device to the $299, $249. I don't know what the education pricing is. Yeah. Right. The kids love the iPad because they've got Apple Pencil support. They've got the keyboard when they want it. I tell the kids to take the keyboard off and just use the pencil. Right. Yeah. Just the pencil changes the whole interaction.
Is Scribble something you guys use at all, or is it too slow and inaccurate for you or your students?
Yeah, it's too slow.
Yeah,
it's too slow. And I think part of that, and I know Windows, I haven't used a Windows machine in a while, but I know that on the surfaces, I think you can use Microsoft's, the tool, the pen tool, and it'll convert quickly. I don't know what the difference is, why Apple's can't function that way.
Yeah, I find it useful only for single word queries or single word things where maybe chapter notes for a podcast, chapter titles, where it's just a couple words or something like that.
Yeah, I wish it was faster. Some of the kids don't realize that they can scribble when they're searching for something. And so there's hey guys, gals, you just scribble. You don't have to actually type because they'll grab the keyboard and reconnect and then type it out. And no, you could just use the functionality. But again, I think the evolution of the iPad is kind of segmented, some of these things that have come later, that if you're a different iPad user, you don't either know that some of it exists or... Yeah,
and you also have the floating iPhone keyboard that's good for the quick type swiping stuff.
Yeah, and that's actually great because the kids already use whatever it is on their iPhones, right?
They're swipers probably.
Yeah, definitely. But again, you don't even know if that exists if you're if you're not getting that training, right? Like, so, like I tell folks who come to the iPad now, it's like, don't use, the 2010, 2011 version of that to guide what you're doing with this device, because this device is not the same, I don't.
Yeah, I remember before I got my first Mac in 2006 or 7, I'd subscribed to Macworld for like a year and was just geeking out and just become obsessed with like all the little intricacies of the Mac even before I owned it. And I kind of feel like that's a thing that sadly, like you kind of need to geek out for a little bit to just learn all the intricacies of a computer.
Yeah, but you also need the simplicity of the OS, and I think this is where, because when the pandemic, I went back to the Mac, and it was like all the things that I hated about a desktop just materialized, right? Like you have 14 windows open, you've got, you've lost track of where the windows are, because even on Mac OS, you don't have great window placement. So you're kind of like, did I open Safari? Did I open Docs? Where did pages go? And so the great thing, the great thing about the iPad is you're just doing that one task at a time, and it's keeping everything simple so that you're not forced to be the geek to go figure out all those shortcuts.
Totally, yeah.
I just wish that Apple would do more to make more of this stuff more aware. And I think now they're doing it with like the education. They've got a bunch of like Apple Teacher, which I joined a number of years ago. They've got these learning sessions at night where you can learn about pencil support and stuff like that. But I wish they would do more for the kids to be like, hey, this is what is available. Because I don't do any of the computer tech stuff of like, here's how you do this, unless a kid asks.
Yeah.
Because they're pretty resilient. They'll figure it out on their own.
Right. They're curious. Any other kind of interesting apps you use as a teacher in your day-to-day, either the students or yourself? So,
do I use any apps? The few apps that I use are basically the Apple stuff. I do use Scribble together, which basically lets the kids literally, as the title suggests, scribble together. You can share a PDF. You can share just the screen. You can actually take the whole session and export it as a PDF. In terms of the students themselves, I mean, I try to get them to use iMovie and use GarageBand and some of that stuff when we're recording podcasts or doing short video. But there isn't, so nothing that I do is really app specific as much as it's more of, okay, what are we doing at that particular moment, and what do you guys need? And go explore what the options are contained on the device. But yeah, I mean, Apple Suite, the Keynote thing knocks out 3 or 4 different apps that, even Apple Notes. I mean, Apple Notes, you're importing PDF, you're marking up PDF, the scan to, I was just telling a colleague of mine, because they were trying to figure out how to get the document onto their device. And it's like,
scanning thing in Notes or the Files app is just killer.
Yeah, is awesome. And it takes the whole, and again, that's another evolution of the device,
Is live text something available on that on the iPads?
So that's funny, because we were doing a training the other day, and we went to go take a picture, and of course it works on the 12.9, the iPad Pros. It doesn't work. I want to say it didn't work on the 6th gen iPad. So I think it's only compatible with certain iPads now. Like it doesn't have the backwards compatibility. So a couple of teachers in the training session were like, "Oh, I can't do that," because they were using an older device. But I think once we get into replacement cycles and folks get updated iPads, I think the plan is to give teachers iPad Airs. I think they'll get there in terms of the live photo. But yeah, I mean, the kids, that was kind of funny because I think it was trending at some point, and I don't think the kids caught on, where you could take a picture of somebody else in front of them and kind of, copy and paste the answer.
Yes.
It's like, I wish that was around when I was in high school. But
I know, right?
So I don't think they quite caught on to that. But yeah, I mean, it depends on depends on the iPad. I want to say that the most recent generations, the 7 and 8, it definitely works.
Yeah, I'm looking at it
I'm
now.
not sure about 5 and 6.
So iPad 8th generation and later, iPad Air 3rd generation later, and then iPad Mini 5th generation. So it appears to be just pretty much the newest stuff.
And it's...
Is there a 9th generation iPad? Is that what
I
we're at?
don't know. I don't think so. Or no, I think that was the one that just came out, right?
Yeah,
Is
I
that
think
the
so.
ninth
Yeah.
gen?
So it's pretty new. So 8th generation would be the only ones that support it for your purposes.
Yeah, I mean, but all the kids have iPhone 12s and iPhone 13s, right? So
Right. So they can do it there.
they could do it there, but they haven't quite caught on. They haven't quite caught, when I showed them that stuff, they're like, "Oh, I wish I would have known." And they're like, "Yeah, well, we purposely don't point that out to you." But
Yeah. Anything else worth talking about as far as the students using iPads or using iPads and pandemic life with iPads or?
no, I mean, I think in terms of the pandemic, it was just sort of like, for me, I didn't experience any except needing like Elgato stuff, in terms of getting the key lights and the Stream Deck and having to go from. It was kind of funny because I sold my MacBook Air in when did the first iPad Pro release?
2015.
So that's when I sold my MacBook Air and was totally iPad. I wasn't doing anything on any other device in terms of a desktop or something like that.
Yeah.
So pandemic hit, and it was like, the limitations on the iPad were just so. I had to go back to a Mac. I had to go back to a desktop that could handle.
Zoom just wasn't full featured enough to do what you need to do as a teacher.
No, and also like the other secondary apps, there was not enough like the Windows support and the limitations of sharing stuff and then coming back to it and having it all in one screen. It's kind of hard to pull that off. And when you think about secondary screen report support, you would
Right. Yeah, if they add that would be huge. If you do multiple external or even just one external monitor.
Just one. I just take one.
Yeah.
Just take one, and get rid of the bars. So like get rid of the 4x3 because like when you're presenting, there's nothing worse than you connect the Chromebook that's the same price or just below that price point, and you get 16:9. And you AirPlay an iPad to an Apple TV, and you get 4x3, and you plug into a monitor, and you're getting this 4x3 support. So like shift screen was great because you could do. And actually, I'd reached out to them and said, "Could you add Google Classroom to like the support?" And they were responsive, and they
he's
they
great.
updated.
I've had him on the show. He's wonderful.
Yeah, well, that's actually how I learned.
Oh, awesome!
About some of those power, because again, you're kind of during that pandemic, it's sort of like you need to know where some of this stuff is, right? Because that's part of the curve.
Yeah.
So and I was thinking this morning between your show, Federico Fatici has had a bunch of like Adapt and
Canvas before
Canvas,
that.
right? Where he was with Fraser Spears, and Fraser Spears had a great podcast with Bradley Chambers, where it was like all education based, and I don't know where that show went, but it was great because you just kind of needed you need to know where this stuff is and how do I work around it, and so you come to shows like yours or you go dig on YouTube and you're typing in like, okay, how do I share my screen, iPad screen, right? Because it's not there, or how do I screen record? And because that wasn't there until recent updates.
Yeah.
So you kind of look for those shortcuts, right? Or automations or stuff like Matthew Castanelli. There was stuff that I took for like emailing my students back their grades through shortcuts because you can't send a mass email to students.
Nope.
So, and that may have been actually, I don't know which one, but I had to email and, be like, hey, sorry to bother you, but do you think you can like share with me how you put together that shortcut? Because all you want to do is send a mass email. You can't do that from an iPad. So having all those resources out there is great.
So this shortcut, it pulls in like from a spreadsheet the student's grade and sends them an email with their grade, or how does it work?
So basically what it does is it now I don't use it as much because of schoolwork, but back when it was sort of like you pulled up a menu, you put all the kids' names in, it sent out an email saying, go check this spreadsheet. Here's the URL for your grade, and then each kid would get a different spreadsheet. So it was impossible. I mean, it was not fun. Right.
No.
Now Apple's caught on to that because, and there were other things that I tried to play with, like how do I get kids to, I wish with the whatever chip that recognizes all the iPads. I wish there was a way for someone just to take attendance, right? So I didn't have to like go check everybody who was physically there. But if there was a way, so I tried to design a shortcut that would collect that information. That failed because there are limitations within shortcuts. So, it's sort of like you just hope that Apple just keeps evolving, and, great folks who host podcasts like this just keep doing what they're doing and are available so that, folks can get access to stuff that is the next level in terms of what they want to do in the classroom or just with their iPads in general.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for your time today. Anything else you'd like to chat about before we wrap it up? I think we've covered a lot of ground today.
No, I think we're good.
Excellent. Any social medias or anything you want to promote? Or
no, I mean I do tweet at my name, so it's at Marko Markolovic. I don't have a blog or a website or anything because I've always kind of thought of this being, for what my students needed to get through. So I've not done any of that stuff in terms of self-promotion. But yeah, I mean, I tweet. So, I take pictures of some of the stuff the kids are doing, use it for, professional learning. So that's pretty much where I am.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Marko, for your time today. It's been just fascinating learning about all this stuff.
Thank you, Tim, for having me on. This is great.
Well, that was my interview with Marko. My thanks to Marko for his time recording this interview, and my thanks to you for your time and attention tuning in. If you want to support this podcast, hop on the App Store now and download Agenda 14. Learn more at www.agenda.com. You can also support the podcast at patreon.com/iPadPros or by subscribing in Apple Podcasts. My great appreciation to everyone that currently or has in the past done that. With that, I'll talk to everyone again real soon.